Thank you very much. I guess, can you all hear me? Okay. Well, first of all, I don't know how to follow that, okay? I'm not going to be that motivating, rah-rah kind of guy. I'm going to be the guy that gives you kind of the nuts and bolts of the fleet industry and what we see going on there. My background is, a lot of you know me. The one thing I love about fleet management is it's very collegial. You know, we all network together, have done for years. When I come here, I see old friends. You know, that's the one bit of advice if you're new to fleet management that I would tell you to do is do not step on anybody because they may be your boss in 10 years, okay? So that's the one thing about fleet that's kind of interesting is that they all work together and we all kind of get back together at some point. I was thinking as I was listening to that last speaker, Randy, and Tiffany jumped up and went, "Ah!" That reminded me, I was actually in Regis and Kelly. Do you remember that? I went to that one time, and I took my wife, and I was sitting there in the audience, and under your seat, they always have like a tag, and they say, you know, if you win this thing, right, that you have to jump up and go, "Ah!" Well, I leaned over to my wife, and I said, if I win, I'm not doing that, okay? So if I win, you're jumping up, and you're going to go, "Ah!" Okay. So guess who won? Me. Yeah. But guess who went? My wife, okay? So we won China that day, which she said, she'll tell you right now, you know, today, I knew I was going to win when we got in there. I said, but you didn't win. I won. Okay? But anyway. You know, and I was listening to the previous speaker, and they was talking about goal setting and stuff, and I've always done that in my whole life. You know, if you look on my iPhone now, right on my wallpaper, I have my goals for this year. And I do that. And it is amazing what you can accomplish if you set your goals every year, you know. And I did the same thing in fleet. You know, I didn't ever set a goal to be in the Hall of Fame of government fleet, things like that, but I did set goals to, you know, to progress as I was going through that, you know. How many of you right now benchmark? I don't see very many hands. How many set goals every year to improve from what you did last year? Okay, good. The one thing I've struggled with my entire career is my weight. Okay? I've gone up 50 pounds. When I got my master's degree, I weighed 310 pounds. Because all I did is eat and drink and do school. That's it. Now, I have a Fitbit, and I have an Apple Watch, and I exercise, and I eat right, and now I balance it. All that is a metric. All that is a goal and a benchmark. It's simple. Now I weigh 190 pounds. And that's my whole goal, is just trying to keep that. So these things can happen when you do fleet management, too. If your cost per mile is X, and you want to get to Y, it can happen. So let's talk a little bit about some of those things. I'm going to skip through a lot of these slides. Most of you know who Mercury Associates is. My background is I was a fleet manager for a city, and then I went to a transit, and then I went to two government fleets. Then I managed the Coca-Cola North America fleet, and then I managed the Republic Services fleet. So that's kind of my background. Okay. So the one thing we've been talking a lot about, and a lot of it kind of goes with my gray hair, you know, because I've been in this business now over 40 years. Okay. And we're starting to see kind of this perfect storm brewing now. That's never really happened. The baby boomer generation is moving through and out of the fleet business. And I see a few gray-haired people out there as well in this audience, okay? And so when I was growing up in the fleet business, there was a corner gas station. All of us had worked part-time. I used to hand tools to my dad because he'd fix our car in the driveway. You know, so I kind of grew up in this business, you know, from the ground up. I remember when I was working for the state of Utah, my mother sent me this old VHS tape. And I thought, what in the heck is she doing, you know? Sending that to my work, first of all. So I pulled it out, and I plugged it in. And it was actually during a time when I was thinking about other things. Do I want to be in fleet? Do I want to do something different, you know? And how many of you have ever got to that point? Anybody? Where you say, what am I doing? Okay. Well, I pulled out this VH tape and put it in there, and it was me, 2 years old, running around in a diaper with a little binky on my shoulder, you know, a blanket, bending down, putting little model cars in a row. And I'm going, gee, maybe this is like destiny or something, you know? I had this huge epiphany. It was 1992. I'd been in the fleet business since, 1976. And I finally said, you know what? Yeah, maybe there's more to this story than there is. And from that moment on, I decided to set more goals. I decided to try to achieve more. And it actually moved me and propelled me in a different direction. So those things can happen, okay? But here's this perfect storm, you know, and I got a lot of material on my slides, and I'm not going to go through them word by word because you can probably download this, but I want to give you kind of a summary so when I'm not here speaking in front of you, you can kind of get the gist of what's on there. But essentially what's happening right now is we got this convergence of the baby boomers moving and technological complexity hitting us simultaneously. How many are seeing that technology out there on your vehicles now? It's huge, right? And is it less money to maintain those? No. Is it less problems? Usually not, okay? I went down and bought a brand new truck, and I actually had a Lincoln before that, okay? So I went from a Lincoln MKX to a F-150. Well, when I went down to buy my wife this F-150, I started test driving trucks, and before long, I got an $80,000 truck. When you drive a Lincoln, you can't do without, you know, all those bells and whistles, right? So now I got an F-150 that's totally loaded. And you know, when I rent cars and I travel, you get used to all that technology, you know, and you think you need it. So in my life, though, as soon as I retire, I'm going to throw my iPhone away, and I'm going to get rid of all technology, okay? So, but those two things are happening right now. The other thing that's happening is this big data. Data is coming from everywhere. You know, you got APIs from this and APIs from that, and they all connect together. And I see fleet managers everywhere that are going, oh my gosh, I don't know what to track. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to sift this data out. Data is coming from all kinds of sources. And it's up to us as fleet managers to try and figure out what are the trivial, you want the critical few metrics, right? You don't want that trivial many because too many metrics will drive you crazy. You won't know where to do. So the big data is an issue. The other thing is coping with finite resources. I haven't talked to someone in the last year that's not so busy they don't know what to do. I mean, people are like frenzied. Their hair's on fire. People are going, oh my gosh, I got so much going on. You know, I'm the same way. I've been on the road since January 2nd. Every single week, traveling somewhere. By the end of this month, I will have slept in my bed 6 times in March. You know, I mean, people are crazy busy right now. And a lot of that's because, you know, the industry and the economy, all that, all those factors. But a lot of it is we got technology now in our pockets and we have less people and more to do, right? That's kind of how that mentality is. So that's another issue. And then we're combating this institutional loss of people and the knowledge they had. And then finally, that transition to a connected and mobile world is happening as well. So basically, I'm going to go through this slide really quick, but basically you're in a business that is managing 2 complete different sets of activities. You have enterprise management activities and you have asset management activities. And these are the enterprise management activities. And think about all the things that you're doing in your organization. This is why you're so busy. Now, the enterprise management activities, they can be handled by other people too. Like some of those, if you look at risk management, you might have a partner somewhere that's doing that for you. Some fleets are doing their own. So those are activities that are functions, right? Now, each one of those functions ends up creating some kind of data. And some of that data comes back to RTA or it comes back to you, and you have to probably do something with it or try and figure out what your next steps are, what your goals are. You're also managing asset management activities. This is really mostly what fleet people do. You got an asset and you're trying to manage it. So, that's, allocating vehicles to customers, replacement planning, those kinds of activities. When you look at it like this, you start to go, oh my gosh, no wonder I'm so busy, right? I mean, look at all the stuff I'm doing, You get out of your little cocoon, and you go, oh my gosh, look what's happening. The ones on the enterprise side are pushing down on you. These ones here, you're doing yourself, right? So you got these two things happening. So that's also, all those activities are creating data. This is that big data phenomenon that's happening out there. And what do you have to do? You have that data to contend with, right? How do I marry those different sets together? How do I get something useful out of that data? Information technology. There's a lot of fierce competition going on for analytical challenges. I mean, how many people are analysts here? Do you know you're a rare breed? You're rare. I had some recruiting this year to do with Mercury, and trying to find a fleet analyst is one of the toughest jobs I've ever had to find. I can find a lot of people that can read spreadsheets, do databases, crunch through numbers, statistical geniuses, but none of them know fleet management. And I remember when I was at Republic Services, I sat down with one of the most brilliant analysts I ever knew. I mean, this guy was as sharp as a tack, created all my dashboards and stuff, sharp. And I sat down with him one time and I said, "What the hell is that spike in the data?" He said, "I don't know." I said, "Well, why didn't you tell me about it? That's like weird. I mean, you know, it goes along and whoop, it went like that." I said, "In your mind, that didn't say anything to you?" It was like our cost, right? It was our cost. I said, that's a problem. No, I didn't know. So this is why a good analyst in fleet, when they see those weird things like that, you need to know about it, right? So if you're an analyst now, bone up your skills, because you're going to become valuable here in the next little while. In fact, I've thought about retiring and becoming an analyst, because I think there's a market out there for that talent. Some of the things in data, I mean, record keeping, compliance. There's so many things happening now. You know, I've met with several fleets that are out of compliance with their risk management, out of compliance with their CSA and their DOT data, and you know, they don't know how to get back in line. You got real-time data from telematics streaming into your system now. And what do you do with that data, right? You got stuff like performance metrics and benchmarking, and you know, you've got some people. How many people have a business intelligence group? Anybody? Well, if you don't now, you will. Okay. Coca-Cola, we had a whole group that did nothing but BI. That's what they did. They had a big data warehouse of data, and they were the ones that brought a lot of that to our attention. So how do we deal with all this technological complexity that's changing the landscape of fleet right now? One of the things that we talk a lot about at Mercury is you're at the crossroads here. Are you going to insource or outsource, or what do you do? This complexity is getting to the point where if you're not doing regular training with your technicians, then you're really getting behind the curve quickly. How many have training programs for technicians? Okay. How many hours you giving them a year? At least 40? Get them out of the office, 40 hours? I mean, that should be 2%. That should be the bare minimum that you train people, 2%. They got to have it. If they don't have that, then you're falling behind the industry, because if you got, a Pep Boys or a Goodyear or a Firestone, they're having to train. The dealers train. They all train regularly because they have to. The technology is changing so rapidly that somebody's got to keep up with it. So, those are things in the middle are just some of the things you should be training on. You got all these autonomous vehicles they keep talking about coming down the road. How many are driving a vehicle now that's fairly new in the last 3 to 5 years? Have you noticed there's a lot of things on there that do things without you? Like there's automatic braking now. There's cruise control, right? That keeps that center, that barrier. There's lane restriction technology. This is all autonomous technology. This is your foray into that technology. Eventually, right now a lot of it's driver controlled and button controlled, but eventually it won't be. And why are they moving that way? Who makes the errors in the car? Usually it's the driver that makes those errors, right? So it's a safety issue, and it's everything else. Although I keep wondering about, I'm one of those guys that likes to rebuild cars. I'm going to be driving that old junk around while everybody else is driving around by themselves, and I'll be the anomaly that's running into everybody, I guess. Because I can't control my car, right? So, changing infrastructure. There's so many things going on. There is companies out there already that are trying to figure out how to tackle this complexity. I always like this slide. I was actually at International a few years back. You can see it 2013 there. I was dealing with a huge problem. We had at Republic Service, our cost per year, we call it the CAGR, the compound annual growth rate of operation costs, went up from basically 3% to 6% every year. Well, you got inflation running around 1% to 2%. Well, 6% is unbearable, right? When your operation costs are going up 6% and you got inflation at 2%. So I was out at International, and I went out there for some training, and they showed me when the emissions came in 2007, that first slide, that shows you what the emission components look like on that board. By 2013, when it kind of ended, it actually kind of ended in 2014 when they finally got there. They're actually, it's even still expanding, but at 2013, look at the difference in that board, 2010 and 2013. Those are all components. Those components were not on trucks prior to 2007. So what did that do when they put that fit? That raised my rates at Republic by 6%, just trying to keep up with DPF filters and all those things that happen. So it was huge, you know. I mean, early 80s, we had 50,000 lines of code that we were dealing with in a car or in computers. Now we're at 100 million lines of code or more. I mean, it's unbelievable. I'll show you this, and I think I have it in a slide here, but just on a Dodge Ram pickup, there's like 30 microprocessor computers now that you got to deal with. I mean, they're huge. What's going on? This actually, it was a slide that I did at Republic. If you look at that first graph up there, it shows you where we were headed, the red line, and what happened when all this emission took off, or the bars, way ahead of the trajectory. So I'm trying to explain this to a CEO, saying, you know, I'm sorry, but this is my trajectory. If you want to lower operation costs, you got to take it out of operations, not out of fleet, because it's not coming out of fleet. We're continuing to go up. Probably why I only lasted there 3 years. He didn't want to hear that. I was the messenger at that point. But I know now, because I still watch their quarterly earnings report. I know they're still struggling with maintenance costs, just like most other people are. And I told him how to get rid of those maintenance costs, which is why we butted heads. I said, you know what? You got to replace your trucks quicker. You can't run 15 to 20-year garbage trucks anymore. Not going to work. Oh, we can't do that. That'll mess up my cash flow model. Yeah, well, okay. I'm going to rebuild trucks at $60,000 a pop then. You do that. You know, so we kind of had a parting of the mind, so to speak. And I said, okay, if you don't want to take that advice, then I can go somewhere else. And I left. You know, and they're still struggling with costs, like every garbage company. Garbage trucks are expensive, you know, and they're, you know, so how many have garbage trucks? Are they expensive? Costing you a lot of money? Yeah, they're expensive. You know what the real optimal replacement cycle is for a garbage truck? Because Mercury's done that number. 7 or 8 years at the most. 5 years if you can get away with it. Yeah, that's you're doing it right. Oh, okay, all right. Yeah. You know, it's one thing, you know. It's the one thing I always say, you know, the one disconnect in fleet management is operations versus capital costs. Nobody can seem to get that together. And they're intrinsically tied. And you need to get that, you need to be thinking about that. So, but I mean, we had stuff like DPF fillers now, they were $5,000, you know, and we had all this stuff, but we didn't have that before. So I tried to explain that to this CEO, and he said, well, I don't want to hear that. Okay. And I heard Randy talk about taking ownership, you know, and taking responsibility. And I remember when we implemented at Republic Services, we had one of the biggest CNG fleet was actually Waste Management, our competitor, but we were quickly tracking that direction. I think when I left there, we had like 2,500, and the first year we adopted that, it was like a mess. I mean, it was a polar vortex year, and I had things freezing up and trucks breaking down, and I was traveling all over the country trying to figure out what was going on. And after I was in York, Pennsylvania, watching fleet manager and dispatcher with tears in their eyes going, I hate these trucks. I was going, oh my gosh, this is a problem. So I got on the phone, I called Cummins up, and I said, hey, you got to come to Arizona, and we got to talk about these natural gas trucks. And I brought him out there, and we sat down, and after about several hours of meetings and them beating me up and me beating them up, I finally said, to our group, stop. We're not buying any more natural gas trucks for a while until Cummins solves this problem. Well, about that same time, we got a new CEO come in, or COO, Chief Operations, okay? And the CEO was really big on these natural gas trucks because that was where they were trying to go. They wanted to send out that message. The COO comes to me and he says, I'm in a crowd of other senior vice presidents. I was a vice president there. And he said, who made the decision to stop buying natural gas trucks? And I went, I did. And then first he goes, okay, well, that's refreshing. Somebody actually took responsibility. I said, well, yeah, because this is why. And I went down the list of why it was breaking, and everything was going on. So I agree with Randy Fox. Take responsibility, okay? That was my first interaction with the COO, and everything thereon was good. Because he thought, well, this guy takes responsibility for himself, so think about that. So let's talk a little bit about big data and the BI world. All these things are combining. You got myriads of data coming from your cell phones. You got myriads of data coming from your computers, from the cloud, the Internet of Things now, right? Who would have thought about the Internet of Things? I'd like to talk to the guy that actually made that up, that name. It's kind of interesting to me. But, you look at it, you've got pad devices. How many have that? How many are mobile now in your shops? You're getting there? I know RTA is coming out with that, so you'll be there pretty soon. Just in one fleet, how many have a fleet of 2,000 vehicles, roughly? Anybody? Okay, a couple of you. Just in that one fleet per month, you're generating, almost 50,000 transactions. Just in that fleet. There's a lot going on in that fleet. Some of the challenges you have is interfacing all that data, for your financial system, from your PDFs, from your risk management system, from your telematics. All that data's got to convert somewhere, right? So you can use it. One of the things we see is there's a lot of poor data quality that happens, right? People, and mostly if people are involved, because we aren't very quality-centric. Sometimes we just want to get what we want to get. We want to get that fuel, so we enter whatever it takes to get that fuel to dispense, right? It may not be the most accurate mileage. We have people entering data from manual work orders. It might not be accurate. So there's somebody's hopefully scrubbing that. We see a lack of reporting tools out there. I've worked with several systems in our consulting practice that I wouldn't give you 10 cents for because they just don't give you good reporting, Lack of staff time, that's a huge one. We don't have enough time to do everything we need to do, so we've got to focus and highlight, what are the critical few things we should be doing. I see a lot of lack of data standards. I worked with a software company, not RTA, but I worked with a software company that didn't even have a data dictionary. They didn't even know what fields they were how they would even define the fields. I said, just give me a data dictionary. I need to know what that field means. What are you capturing in that field? Well, we don't have a data dictionary. I said, well, okay, I don't want to create it, so you either help me create it or we'll change to RTA, okay? Lack of system training. That is huge out there. A lot of people aren't being trained in the software. And there's a couple of big, giant software companies that you're probably familiar with. People aren't getting the training. Those are complicated systems. Hopefully you're getting the RTA training because there's the only way you can keep up with this is to get that training, and you should be doing it every year. That's why most of you are probably here this week to see all the innovation, things are going on. But your people need to be trained. It doesn't come natural to a lot of people. What do you do with all this data? I like to put that first bullet there. Data is worthless on its own. If you don't do anything with it, it's completely worthless. I always see people trying to convert things, I got to have all my old data because we're turning it into a new system. Well, if you didn't do anything with that previous data, probably don't worry about it because it's probably worthless by now. So this is how you enable data. You have to have exception reports, and you got to be able to look at the trends and predict things and be able to use that data as action items. These are ways. I actually saw this. I'm not going to go through all these, but this is an article I read just recently in the automotive fleet. Talked about some ways that you can use your data to improve your fleet operation. Some of that is simple things like like scheduling of your shop. You know, a lot of people don't even schedule their shop. They run around with their hair on fire trying to figure out what to put out next, right? But we found that you can lower costs significantly if you start scheduling stuff. So minor problems, I mean, this is why you need to schedule. This is also why you need artificial intelligence. Minor problems usually cascade into bigger problems. That's just the nature of fleet equipment. And I'll show you a little bit about that. If you're not scheduling things, if you're not looking at data, you could be incurring costs that are unnecessary. Like 40 or 60% of costs in a recent study from this Uptake, it's a company out there that does a lot of predictive analytics, said that 40 to 60% of the failures were batteries. And they've got to the point now where they can predict when a battery will fail within 7 days, just using their analytics that they're doing. Is that valuable information to know that 7 days in advance? Be huge. I'll show you why. Unplanned breakdowns are really costly. This is, you can Google this out there. I've been using this for a couple of years, but it comes from Gieslin's inverse square theory, rule for unplanned maintenance, okay? Or deferred maintenance, they call it. They talk about several energy states. Think about PM versus predictive here. If you're proactive and you pull a vehicle in to do a preventive maintenance and you notice that the wheel bearing is leaking and it's about ready to go out, or, because that's usually the first sign, it starts to leak, starts to make noise, it may be about $15 for that part, give or take, right? But if you don't do something with it and you let that vehicle go out on the road and that wheel bearing fails on the road, the second energy state level, then it becomes $225 because now you've probably damaged the axle. Now you've probably created a road call. Now you've got to run somebody out there, and so now it squared itself. Went from $15 to $225. Now, if you let it get to the third energy state, which is it failed, it's on the road, and now the vehicle got involved in an accident, third energy state, now it's $50,000. The $15 wheel bearing turned into $50 in the third state because somebody didn't deal with it predictively or proactively. This is why, if you're doing a lot of reactive maintenance in your operation instead of preventative maintenance, 80% of what you should be doing in your operation should be preventative maintenance or predictive maintenance, 80%. I've run into fleets in our consulting practice. I was one last year in St. Louis. 80% of their maintenance was reactive and 20% was preventative. Their costs were completely upside down. And it showed. Their budget was outrageous. Their costs were crazy. Their people were running around so busy because they didn't know anything. All they were doing was fixing vehicles on the road, in the shop. Nothing was planned. So those are the things to think about. Try and get yourself to think preventative. So how do you use data? I always use this thing. It was Willie Sutton, bank robber, back in the Dillinger days and stuff. They always asked him why he robbed banks. He said, that's where the money's at, right? They have all the money, so why not? Okay, so these are the buckets you should be focusing on to save money in your fleet, right here, the top 4 buckets. Usually the top one is always depreciation. How many have more vehicles in your fleet than you need? Yeah, a few hands. Most fleet managers know this. It's the operations people that don't know that, right? Because they got to have them all. But that's the number one thing to do, is look at your depreciation expenses. And sometimes those are what they call soft costs. You don't always see those costs. Okay? Fuel expenses, right now fuel's cheap. But when fuel goes up, fuel is usually one of your top two costs. So how do you get fuel costs to go down? 3 is always people. That's why you guys are all working so hard, because management already figured that out. That's why when you lose somebody to retirement or somebody quits, they're gone, right? That position's gone and you're doing more. So, and then the next one, of course, is M&R expenses. You can break that down any way you want. It's usually electronics, brakes, tires. Those are the 3 top buckets there. Okay? So if you're not spending your time working on those, if you're trying to cut costs, that's where you need to focus in that order. So the first thing you do is you need to make sure you have the right life cycles, like we talked about, 5-year garbage trucks, okay? Often right replacements on. How many have a long-term planning program? our fleet replacement program? Good. You need to think about it as you go forward because that's important. It's critical. You understand depreciation could be as high as 50% of your fleet costs. Isn't that where you should be looking and working? Okay. We have tools that we do. We do a number of these engagements where we do right-sizing fleets. I always thought, well, why would somebody hire me to tell them they have too many vehicles? But usually it's because management doesn't recognize that, and you're trying to get them to do that. But this is typically what we look at. We put them into 3 buckets, and then we give this information to them. We tell them which ones to get rid of. I've done probably a dozen of those in the last year. I haven't been to one fleet that can't reduce their fleet by 5 to 10%. Not one. So when you go home, start looking at that because you can get rid of a lot of vehicles. If you don't have a long-term replacement program, how many of you have a chargeback program? Good. You're using RTA correctly. There's 2 things I've always said. Now, I'm 40 years in the fleet business. There's 2 things I say. Have a long-term replacement program and have a chargeback program that works, and that you can solve almost 90% of the fleet problems. Those 2 things make people accountable, okay? The more vehicles you own, the higher cost your fleet cost you have. It's just so obvious if you look at it. We have these 2 methodologies that we use to actually reduce the size of fleets. One I showed you, the 3 buckets, that's called the VAM methodology. The other one we just started getting into is zero-based fleet budgeting. Taking your whole fleet every year and looking at it and saying, okay, do I need this one? Do I need that one? Kind of a zero base, making your customers justify the vehicle. And that's, of course, based on all types of parameters, right? Like mileage and days used and hours used. And if you've got telematics, how many are into telematics now? A few hands. Eventually, all your vehicles have telematics on them. It's just a matter of whether you're using that or not, okay? Because they're coming. It's coming from the factory. And I can tell you that if you're not using it, the factory is using it, what's on your car, because that's how they make sure your warranties are paid and stuff. So eventually, you're going to start using that. Ford, GM, they all have it. So this is the replacement cycle I was talking about. There's always a sweet spot somewhere where capital and operating costs converge. Make sure you do that analysis. It's not a hard analysis. It's a spreadsheet. Capital costs versus capital costs plus operating costs on a time scale. That's it. So go out there and try and run that analysis. Figure out by each vehicle class where you're at so you have a pretty good idea. The more analytical you can make this to your superiors, the better you're going to be in trying to explain this to them. Fuel expenses. How many are using like a fuel provider like a Ride Express or something like that? Okay, now they have a lot of analytics and a lot of data they can share with you. How many are doing your own? Okay. And your data then you need to kind of come up with some of these tools I'm talking about here. Miles traveled, capture the fuel transactions, capture your correct miles and hours, those kinds of things. Make sure that you scrub the data that's accurate so you can kind of predict where you're at. Fuel expenses can be 10 to 20% of your budget. So that's why I put that in the number 2 category. And good strategies can reduce fuel by 5% easily. And that is, that's routing, that's having the right vehicle for the right application. Easily you can reduce your fuel cost by 5%. Another principle that we use, how many people are using VEU analyses? Got somebody over here? Yeah, think about that. I was working at one company, and they sized their mechanic staff by vehicles. So for every 7 vehicles, we had a mechanic. And I went, wait a minute, I got golf carts and I got garbage trucks. How does that work out? There's obviously more effort to fix a garbage truck than a golf cart, right, or a trailer. So nobody ever thought about that. Well, that's what VEUs do. They help you normalize that data. And that's how. 1 VEU would be a car, 6.5 would be that boom truck on the end there, right? So you want to make sure you have that because of the effort that's involved. VEUs they're useful for staffing. They're useful for cost analysis. So a lot of fleet training that you'll find out how to do that. It's not difficult. It's not something Mercury invented. It's something actually the Air Force started using back in the 40s. It's been around that long. So go out and Google that, figure out how you can do it. Because one of the things that you as a fleet manager can do to be more successful is to be able to be more analytical and be able to show facts and show statistics and show data. You can't just go up to your public works director and say, I need more trucks. Because they're going to say, nope, can't have more trucks. I need more trucks because look at the usage I've got here. Look at my costs, and look at this, and look how many drivers I've got. Have those statistics ready at hand. VEUs, you can benchmark your costs. Right now, the average cost per VEU going across the country that we see is around $1,800 per VEU. If you're less than that, like this particular fleet was, this is actually from a fleet that I did work on. There's $1,600. You can tell your boss, you know what, look, we're doing pretty good. We're $200 under the average for VEU. You can also size your staff because one VEU equals 12 to 15 labor hours. So you start doing this analysis with that, and you start showing how many have all the mechanics they need right now? Boy, there's not one hand. Oh, there's a guy. All right, well. But if you're trying to get more people, you've got to have a way to justify it, right? So this is how you do it. Turn your fleet into VEUs, capture the hours, get the basic principles, and it'll be in this spreadsheet. How many people are using standard repair times right now? Okay, good. Everything's different, right? That's how the warranties that are paid to you from the dealers come from standard repair times. That's how they deal with it, right? How many are doing in-house warranty? Okay, good. You should be. Because they can cut down downtime, right? You can save costs. This is an easy program. I have a program because I do a lot of maintenance. I know I was talking to Gail here before we started. Me and one other guy do a lot of the maintenance consulting and best practice stuff. Well, I have a program on my PC. It costs me $230 a year that does standard repair times. And it's pretty robust, amazingly. It's not like the motor manual or the Chiltons or any of that. It's really expensive. This is called real-time labor, and it's actually fairly accurate. But, for example, you can have your mechanics working 70% of their time what we call direct labor, turning wrenches. But they could be like the guy I ran into in one shop that had like a screwdriver, and he was doing this all day. I asked him, what are you doing? Well, it looks like I'm working, doesn't it? Well, no, he wasn't ever working. But everybody thought, man, he looked busy. I was at one company, I was at Coca-Cola, and I tried to figure out what one guy was doing. All I ever saw him do was carry a clipboard around. I said, what do you actually do? I carry a clipboard around. That's what he did. Okay, but he looked busy, right? So you need to be able to get in and say, okay, they're working 70% of their time in direct labor because that's what they're coding on repair orders. But what are they actually doing? Okay, if a brake job to replace the front disc pads on the high end is an hour and 10 minutes, average is just short of an hour, and the low end is 0.7 hours. You need to know that because that way you can couple those two numbers together and have an efficient mechanic, right? So understand that that's another component of managing your labor force. And this will give you an idea of these metrics. I'm not going to go through all of them because we're going to be short on time, but 70% should be your direct labor target at least. 90 to 100% of the SRT time they should be doing. VEU costs and so forth. We talked about training 40 hours a year. Talked about your top buckets in maintenance, PM costs. PM should be always one of your top costs. That's not a bad thing. If you're spending a lot of money on PM, that's usually a good thing. And you always try to manage your costs at the top 20%, right? The old 80-20 rule, okay? How many of you are doing operational excellence now? You're actually process mapping things. How many have followed around your mechanic on an A inspection to see what he's actually doing? Has anybody done that? Good, because there's a lot of wasted steps if you're not. Running over to parts, going to the drinking fountain, talking to the customers, right? Oh, I forgot that tool. I got to go back. There's the things you can do to stage and keep that guy close to the truck. These are just some other benchmarks, and I talked a little bit about this, and I just wanted to mainly give you this data so that when you go back, you can use it. So how do we transition to a new mobily connected world? Okay? These are the things that are hitting you right now. The reason they're doing that, they're trying to bring more economy of scale to you, more efficiency. Right now, I'm not sure that's exactly true, but hopefully we get there. But I know that at some point, I mean, the big driver for autonomy right now is accidents because of the driver and some of the critical things drivers do. It would be nice to get to an accident-free workplace, particularly in car accidents. I'll tell you, I mean, I'm a big believer in that technology. In 2012, I was managing the state of Georgia fleet, and I bought a brand new 2012 Hyundai Sonata. Okay? And I'm a big Hyundai fan now. What they've done with their cars since their first foray into cars was terrible. They shut down their whole plant because they had terrible cars, and they said, we're not going to have terrible cars anymore. And their CEO completely rebuilt the model of cars, and they're actually putting out some pretty decent cars. But in 2012, I bought a Hyundai Sonata, which was about 3 years into their new quality of cars. I had a drunk driver run a red light and make a left turn while I was going down the street, so he hit me in the corner, my side corner, kind of on an angle. Head on, both of us were going 40 miles an hour at least. 40. Car had 1,500 miles on it. I just bought it, brand new. 4 airbags deployed on top of me. My seatbelt held me into the seat. The car had a crumple zone that crumpled like it was supposed to. I couldn't get out the driver door. I was completely trapped in the car. The car was on fire. So I'm unbuckling my seatbelt to try and get out of this car. And lo and behold, I hear like God talking to me going, Mr. Saltzgiver, are you okay? We've realized that you've just been in a car accident, and it's a pretty severe car accident, and we have called 911. And I'm going, what the hell? It was my Hyundai Blue Link. The guy actually got that registered because I had that, it's like OnStar. Hyundai had Blue Link. And I was going, man. I had one little airbag burn on my wrist. I had a bruise on my chest after the fact because of the seatbelt. I'm crawling out the passenger door to get out of this car, and the car's talking to me. I basically walked away from what could have been a very severe life-ending crash from a drunk driver hitting me going 40 miles an hour because of technology. So I'm a big believer in technology. That car was completely totaled out. I'd bought it for almost $35,000, and they just wrote me a check. But that's the value, and that's what they're trying to do with this technology that we see. Trying to reduce downtime. The big issue with downtime is you got to be more proactive. You got to be able to take care of things before they happen. What technology can result in a 97% reduction in speeding, 7% improvement in fuel economy, 47% reduction in accidents? If you guessed it, it's autonomy. That's why they're trying to go that way. Driverless vehicles using technology. Industry forecasts predict the number of fleet vehicles employing connected or car technology now, and by 2020 it'll be 12.7 million. So it's just going to continue and continue. In 2012, 1.8 billion people were connected. Today it's 3 billion, and it's going to expand to 8 billion, in the future by 2025. So, I mean, think about all the people that are connected. Everywhere you go, we're all carrying one of these phones around, right? So, I mean, I just saw an app I just bought on Amazon that I can connect my iPhone now with a dongle in my car to read my codes. What's that going to do to dealers' mechanics? When you go into the dealer, you say, oh, I got this code. They're not going to be able to pull the wool over your eyes anymore, right? Knowledge is power. So, traditional PMs versus dynamic PMs. This is something that we're doing right now with some of our clients. Traditional PMs, you have a checklist, right? You go through one by one. Check, 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 check. Well, in the future, that's not going to happen because systems and components have totally different lives, if you think about that. They're the cars. So one of the things that's going to happen now, today, this is that thing today, 100 micro computers on cars now. They're all controlling something, and they all have different wear patterns. This is what we're doing with some of our clients now. We're doing what we call dynamic PM. It's emerging into place. It saves money and time. All these different components on that vehicle, that truck there, They all wear at different times. They all have different cycles to check them, right? So imagine with a dynamic PM that you create on-the-fly checklists. Okay, that vehicle's coming in, and on number one, I only need to check this little small group because that's all it's due now. That truck's set out there, and it didn't do a lot, and some of these other components haven't worn. So I don't have to go through that great big long list at this time because I just didn't get that much accumulated. You know, so that's kind of what's happening in the workplace now, and you're going to see that more and more. And I was telling Josh, you know, how is that going to happen in RTA? How are you going to, with telematics, get all those different component, you know, intervals into the system so you can start crafting and customizing your PMs? Let's talk. Lastly, I want to talk a little bit about human capital. And I always like this cartoon because the new productivity goals are here. More. How many feel like that? Yeah, I feel like that. I thought when I was 64, which I am now, I thought, man, I'm not going to work 80 hours a week. Well, joke's on me. I'm working about 80 hours a week. Yeah, I'm everywhere. I'm traveling 40 hours a week just in airplanes and airports, and you know, I mean, it's crazy out there. So that's kind of our new lifestyle, I think. So that's why you have to have balanced metrics, right? I rolled in from the airport yesterday. First thing I did is I went up to my room, I put on my gym clothes, I went down to the thing, and I ran for an hour down to the treadmill. Because I know if I don't do that and I'm on the road, I'm going to eat a lot. Okay? So you got to make sure your life is balanced. Try and find those things. You know, we talked about that with Randy this morning. Family is important, right? You know, we have those things, and I talk to my wife 2 or 3 times a day. We have a great phone relationship because I don't see her much anymore, you know. But in fact, sometimes the phone relationship's actually better, but keeps us married longer. I've been married 45 years now, so something's working. And that's the relationship I have with my kids too, you know. This is an interesting thing. I have a son that travels like I do. And he called me one Sunday night and he said, "Where are you going tomorrow, Dad?" And I said, "Well, I'm flying to Dallas on the 6:18 flight from Salt Lake." He sends me a text, he says, "Really? I'm on the 6:18 flight to Dallas tomorrow morning." And then I said, "What's your seat number?" I said, "I'm on 18C. I didn't hear anything for a minute. He says, "I'm on 18A. I mean, what is the odds of that? That we would be 2 separate lives. I mean, talk about we're connected, the world is small. Well, okay, we both get to the airport. He's by the window and I'm on the aisle. And guess what? Nobody said in B. Yeah, the plane was full, but nobody said in B. Well, that was a perfect moment for me to talk to my son that we never see. So, you know, whether you believe in God or not, I think things like this are not coincidental. Okay, I hadn't seen this son for months because we're always on the road. So that was like life revealing to me. I went, wow, okay. Anyway, so think about that. We're so busy. You know, we keep saying we're streamlining this, streamlining that, but I don't know. It seems like we're still busy to me. So we're doing more with less. We talked about value add versus non-value add, process mapping. This is a garbage truck PM that I did when I was at Republic. You don't want to be that top one, okay? That's what the mechanic did before we went in and value map and processed that, okay? There were so many non-value add steps that person was making. So if you're not doing that in your operation, you don't have enough time, you don't have enough mechanics, do something like this to figure that out. What are they doing? How can I streamline that process? Other things, we talked about the baby boomers moving out of the workplace. I don't know about you, but I've learned a lot in my 40 years in fleet. You know, there's things, I mean, and I still don't know stuff. This is that kind of business. You know, think about someone just coming out of college or even high school now and what they have to learn that you know. I mean, how are you going to impart that knowledge to them? You know, how many of you have a mentorship program? How many of you have an apprenticeship program? How many of you have an orientation where you do a one-on-one with a new person? I mean, there's so many things that they're not formal now. People need to, you know, you got to get what's in my brain out to that person that's coming in. You know, I see it all over the country. I have a colleague in Illinois. She retired. Now she's still working in Illinois for the state because they brought her back. I see that happening all the time because the new people didn't know what to do. So they brought her back as a contractor. Now she's trying to train those people. Now, you don't have to realize that you lost all your institutional knowledge if you put together a program before the person walks out the door. You know? One way or the other, you're going to have 2 people for a period of time because this is what this transition, this baby boom or perfect storm is doing to her. You know, with all that complexity, that technology coupled with that. There's actually a shortage of technicians. I had one, when I was a Republic Service, I was doing job fairs. I was going out to UTI. I was signing people up before they even stepped 1 foot into college. I said, if you'll come work for me, I'll buy your tools. If you come work for me when you graduate, you know, I'll buy your toolbox. I'll pay for your school. Now, I was in an interview last week at NTEA, and it's out there on YouTube now, and some guy posted something, and I think you're making a big deal out of this. I don't see that. I've been in this business for 40 years. I go, great. I haven't contacted him yet, but I'm thinking about contacting him because I'm thinking if he's not experienced, then I don't even know why. Because every client that I've worked with, just about every person I talk to, cannot find qualified technicians when somebody retires. I've got some clients that have posted a job and had it up for over a year. You know, now in government, if you're in a government fleet, you do have some advantage because there's usually pensions tied to these people, and they don't usually jump ship and leave. But if you're in a corporate environment, man, you're in trouble because there's no hook to keep them there. So think about that. We have, with all this complexity, it's requiring more and more technicians. That's what I showed earlier with the outsourcing versus insourcing. That's what's happening. You're going to end up, and we predict this now at Mercury, we think we're going to end up with a lot more outsourcing, which is going to be costly. It's going to be expensive because people are not keeping, the people that can hire the technicians are the Penske's of the world. The people that do this for a living, they hire those technicians, and they train them. So these are the challenges. You know, people have been underinvesting in people for the last 30 years or so. Now they're all leaving. Now there's a shortage. The number 1 shortage actually isn't mechanics, though. It's drivers. That's why the autonomous vehicle and the platooning and all that stuff is coming out. Drivers are the number 1 vocation in the country. On any given day, if you work in the private sector, turnover is 110% now. 110. They can't even keep the same guy for a year. When I was at Republic, that was a huge metric that we were tracking. We were at 25% turnover for drivers. And that's your CDL drivers, but we couldn't find them. You know, and you have to be real careful because you don't want to take somebody that came from a place that wasn't very good, right? So those are some of the issues you have to you're faced with. So there's got to come up with some things. The other thing, too, and I'm going to kind of wrap up on this, is the generational differences now in the workplace are astounding. I mean, you think about, you've got older people like me, you've got people like my grandkids now entering the workforce. Do we think alike? No. Do we have the same values? Not likely. Do we work the same way? Not really. Okay? I mean, the reason Mercury likes me is my CEO can call me on the phone and say, I need you in Brownsville, Texas tomorrow. Okay, I'm in Brownsville, Texas tomorrow. If you've ever flown to Brownsville, Texas from Salt Lake City, that's not fun. Not pleasant to get there. But that's the way I grew up. That's the kind of work ethic that I have. If you did that with my grandson, he'd say, I can get there maybe next week. Maybe. I'm playing a game here. I can't do that. You know, I got things I'm doing. Well, that's the difference, right? So, I mean, by 2025, 3/4 of all workers will be millennials, and that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about my grandson millennial. They think differently. Work is not their life. They have other life, right? The average tenure of a millennial, and we see this at Mercury all the time because we hire a lot of them, 2 years. These are our analysts, 2 years. We can't get them to last more than 2 years. That's how they last. They're always trying to get up and mobile and do things, and, you know, so that they have a different work ethic. I mean, most of you, how many of you have been at your job 10 years? Look at all those hands. How many have been 20 years? More hands. Yeah, millennials, 2 years. Okay? So 45% of millennials say that they will choose the workplace flexibility over pay. I'm not tardy, I'm not late, I'm flexible, right? Okay. 54% of millennials want to start a business or have already started one, so they're not even interested in working for you. They want to do something on their own, right? Millennials touch their phone 45 times an hour. Now you know why we have screen time measurements on our iPhones, right? Yeah, so that's what you're going to have to contend with as you start hiring people. The reason I'm consulting now, I'm tired of supervising people. I'll give you guys all the credit in the world, because I started seeing this happen a few years ago where, man, it was tough to get people to work for you. I remember saying I'd get references from people, and which you don't like to give out references. But I got to the point where I'd say, yes, you'd be very lucky to get this person to work for you. And I didn't say that in a bad connotative term like that, but yeah, you'd be very, very glad to have this person work for you, because they weren't good for me, and they didn't work for me. But anyway, that's all I really have, but hopefully that was helpful to you. If you have questions, I'd be happy to answer some questions.